Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Simon, and in this video I'm going to cover everything that you need to know about your first test in the UNIX Administration course at Mohawk College. Firstly, let me apologize in advance because I've been battling a cold all week and my throat is really scratchy, so I'm probably going to sound raspy. I might grunt, I might cough, and it's probably going to sound really gross. But like I said, I apologize in advance. If you could just bear through it, I promise you I'm going to give you a lot of really awesome information so you can really prepare for this test and get an amazing grade. So I promise you, if I feel the urge to cough, I will mute the mic. So if you hear all of a sudden I stop talking, it's probably because I mute the mic because I cough. But if you can just bear through it, good things will come. So thank you in advance. And once again, I apologize. But let's talk about this video and this test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you tips and suggestions on what you can focus on so you can efficiently study for your test, and then I'm going to go through this practice test that you were given. And what's really awesome about this is that it is the exact same practice test that I was given when I took this course last winter. So what that means is that most likely the test that you're going to have to write is probably very similar to the one that I wrote. Okay, so it's not going to be exactly the same. I can't help you cheat. I can't give you any definitive answers. But because it's probably going to be really similar, I can give you a lot of awesome general advice. Okay, so let's just start with the tips. The very first tip I can give you is if you're concerned about what the actual test looks like, don't be. Because the format of the test looks exactly like the format of this practice test. So look at this format. It actually probably looks very similar because it looks like the grade lab. That's what your test is going to look like. Your teacher's going to come over, give you 2 or 3 physical pages of paper, and when you look at it, it's going to look like this, except it won't say practice test. Now, I'm talking about the formatting only, so what I'm saying is you're going to see this little prerequisites thing, and you're not going to read it because no one ever does. You're going to see this grading thing, and you're not going to read it because no one does. You're going to see part A, and it's going to tell you import fresh copies of the W01 and S01 virtual machines. And then you're going to have several parts asking you to do several tasks until the very last part where it says grading. That's what you're going to get. That's it. And it's going to be stuff that you're very familiar with, stuff that you've seen before in either the practice test, practice lab, or grade lab. Now, here's your second tip. The practice test is not the exact same thing as what is going to be on your test, but it will prepare you for 80% of what you'll see on your actual test. So I'll explain what I mean by that. The practice test is going to tell you things like this. Create 2 new users on SO1 with usernames of Sally and Sue. On your test, you're probably not going to get the name Sally and Sue. And you might not only have 2 users, you might have 3 users or 4 users. When it says create a group named twins containing Sally and Sue, you might have a different group name, or maybe 2 groups that you have to create. And if you have 4 users, maybe 2 users will go in one group and 2 users will go in another group. So it's not going to be the exact same. You will have a section most likely that says users and groups, and you'll have to create users and create groups, but it's just going to be a little bit different in terms of material. Okay, so that is one thing to know, is you're going to basically be 80% prepared for your test if you only study the practice test. So definitely study the practice labs, because the other 20% is most likely going to come from the practice labs. You can do the grade labs. There might be 1 or 2 things that are in the grade labs, but from my experience, definitely the practice labs will give you what you need to know. So let me look at what else I can give you in terms of tips. Okay. Alright, so here's another tip. Don't worry about memorizing commands. When it comes to commands, they are going to be in the practice labs. And remember, this is an open book test. So at any point in time, you can go into eLearn and you can look for the commands that you're looking for. So what you should really be doing is you should get yourself very familiar with what each lab is trying to teach you. Because if you know what each lab was trying to teach you, then when you're looking at your test and you see something that it's asking you to do, you'll say, I remember that I learned that in this one lab. Example, it says create 2 new users. You're going to be able to say, I remember that I learned how to create users in the users and groups practice lab. And then you'll be able to go to eLearn, go to the practice lab, and you'll find the command that you're looking for. So memorizing commands would be way too overwhelming. You don't need to. It's an open book test. Don't worry about that. Just make sure you know what each lab's trying to teach you, so that way when you do the test, you'll know which practice lab you need to look at to get the command that you need, and you're going to save a lot of time. You have an hour and a half to 2 hours to do this test, and I can tell you that this actual test will probably only take you 45 minutes if you know what you're doing. You're going to see that even with my explanation, when I actually start the test, we'll look at the time, you'll see it doesn't take me long to go through this test at all. And I did say that there's one or two things that are on your test that isn't on the practice test, but like I said, you'll see. If you have practiced the practice test and the practice labs, it should only take you about 45 minutes to complete this test. It's not asking you to do a ton of things, and it's not that hard to do as long as you've practiced. But where people find that they struggle is that they don't know what each lab has tried to teach them. So they're going through the test and they're like, I don't know where to find these commands, and they're just clicking on practice lab after practice lab trying to find these things, and it's wasting time. So make sure you don't memorize the commands, but you do memorize and familiarize yourself with what each lab is trying to teach you. That way you save a lot of time and you know where to find the commands that you're looking for. Okay, so that's your other hint or a tip. Here's another one, and it's kind of in the same ballpark. Look at the name of the title. So part B, users and groups. There is literally a practice lab called users and groups. So everything that we're going to do here, you're going to find in users and groups. This one says add a disk. Okay, so there isn't a lab called add a disk, but there is a lab called file systems and disks. So most likely everything that we're going to have to do here is going to be found in the practice lab for file systems and disks. This one's a little bit different. It says install MySQL. So when we look at all of these, there's actually two labs that we're going to reference. One is the installing and upgrading software lab, and then there's also the system startup and services lab as well. But at least you know that the titles typically give you a hint as to which practice lab you can look at to get the answers that you need. So even if you're not crazy familiar, even if you don't memorize every single step of every single lab, at least you know that you've got a bit of a hint in the title typically. Okay. Besides for that, the only other tip I can give you is that you don't have to worry about anything coming out of left field. Even though there's one or two things that are not in this practice test, like I told you, these things that are not in the practice test are in the practice labs or the grade labs, but I think most of them should be in the practice labs. Unfortunately, I don't have eLearn available because Mohawk has, I don't know, eLearn's down for some reason, so I can't reference it during this lab or this video. So I apologize about that, but I will tell you which labs to go to when I do things in this practice test, when I go through all of this, so that you know where to look at least. But yeah, you're not going to see anything that comes out of left field. And if you do, if there's something that's completely new, they'll typically tell you what you need to know. For example, here, installing MySQL. MySQL isn't something you ever downloaded or installed in any of the practice labs or grade labs. So you're going to be like, well, I don't know what to use in terms of the name for MySQL when I use the install command. And it tells you right here, hint, you're going to be using the name MySQL-server. So if there is something new, they'll give you the information you need. But like I said, from my experience, the test that I had, there was absolutely nothing new. Everything was in the actual practice labs that I've done and the practice test. Okay? So that's a lot of tips. I apologize. I know that I probably talked a little bit longer than I wanted to, but let's get into doing the actual practice test and see if we can figure this all out. So let's look at the time. It says 6:08, so remember that, so that when we go through this, we can see how long it takes, even with all of my explanations. The very first thing we're going to do is import a clean and fresh copy of W01 and SO1. Okay, so you're going to be on Mohawk College computers, obviously, when you do this test. Most likely you won't have previous copies in VirtualBox, but if you do, just delete them because we want fresh copies. So right click, remove, click delete all files, go to file, click import appliance, click the browse button and find the OVA file on your computer. And once you find it, click open, Click next. And then in terms of these settings, you can leave it the way it is because everything we're going to be doing is mostly in SO1, and SO1 I never change because there's no need to. But if you want, just for the sake of it, the W01 virtual machine, you might see a little bit of an advantage if you change the CPU number from 1 to 2, and if you change the RAM number from 1024 to 2048. But that's about it. I wouldn't do anything else because you won't notice any difference, especially with those Mohawk College computers. So when you're happy with your settings, go ahead and click import. And wait, definitely make sure that you do this before you get your test because this can take a long time. My computer's not too bad because it's a home computer with a little better specs than the actual Mohawk College computers, but on yours, definitely make sure you do it way in advance before you get the test because it can take some time. So we'll just wait for these guys to load. It won't take too long, and then once they do, I'm going to actually start them one at a time, and you should do that as well because you don't want to slow down your machine. Remember, Mohawk College is giving you like 8 gig machines, so you don't want to do anything that's going to slow down your machine during a test. So just start them one at a time, and that should be sufficient. First thing that we're going to do once they do load is get into part B. So I'll explain what we're going to do. Basically, it says in this section you'll add 2 new users to SO1 named Sally and Sue. Sally and Sue are twins, and as such, they like to share files. So the sharing files isn't something really important just yet, but we do have to add these 2 users. So let's load up W01, and we'll wait. There we go. So I'm just going to drag this guy here. If you want, you can log into SO1 now. And we're going to log in as root. Password is admin pass. There we go. We'll still wait for W01 to load just so that that's all good. And then we can go into part B. Okay, so log into Alice. Password is user pass. There we go. And now we don't have to do anything with W01 until the very end of this practice test. So in SO1, we can begin. So the first thing it says is create 2 new users on SO1 with usernames of Sally and Sue. Like I said, everything that I'm going to do, you're going to find in the practice lab for users and groups. So go into users and groups, click on the practice lab, and you'll find this. But the answer to the first one is this. You're going to type in user add. You're going to type in the name of the user, so Sally, and then -m. Okay? Hit enter. We didn't get an error, so let's hit the up arrow, just erase Sally and put Sue in there, and hit enter, and there we go. We have just added Sally and Sue. So just to clarify, remember how I told you that this practice test will prepare you for 80% of the actual test? Remember that in the practice lab for users and groups, what the actual command was that you're going to learn is something like this. User add, let's say Sally, and then it said -c, and it gave the full name, like Sally Field, and then -m. You might have to do that on the actual test. You might actually have to put the comment and put the actual name in there. So that could be something that is just expanding on what you did on the practice test. So just be prepared for that. Just know that it may not be as simple as saying user add Sally -m. If he actually, if your teacher gives you a full name and says he wants the full name, when you create the user, make sure that you're putting in the full name. But in this case, we didn't have to. So all I had to do is put user add, the username, and -m. And that was all we needed to add users to this SO1 virtual machine. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. It says give both new users the initial password of Mohawk 1. And here's the cool thing is he even tells you the command. He purposely put out the OR and just put in password like this so that you knew exactly what you had to do. But again, this is in the users and groups practice lab. So let's do that. We're going to say password and the username, Sally, and you're going to hit enter. So it asks for a new password. You're going to type in Mohawk1, and when you hit enter, it's going to say bad password, and that is because it doesn't meet the security requirements that Linux wants you to have. But you're root, so as long as you say, hey, I'm root, I want that password, and you type it in again, the system will let it happen and be like, okay, you're the boss, I'll do whatever you say. So all you have to do is type in Mohawk1 again, hit enter, and it says it updated successfully. So let's try it again. We're going to do password, but this time for Sue. It's going to say new password. We're going to say Mohawk1. Bad password. We're going to say too bad. Listen to me. I'm root. So we're going to type in Mohawk1 again. And updated successfully. So we are good. So we just did this part. And we have now done this part. So we can move on to this, which says force each user to change their password the next time they log on. Okay. I'm going to clear this. Once again, you're going to find this in the Users and Groups Practice Lab. What you're going to do is type in this command. chage the -d, and that D stands for days left before the user has to change their password. And we're going to say 0 because we want them to change it right away. And then the username. So Sally, hit enter. We didn't get an error, so that's good. And now just change Sally to Sue. And we're done. So now this is all done. So we've just done 3 things, and that took us no time at all. So the last thing is we have to create a group named Twins, and it has to contain Sally and Sue. So there's technically 2 things we have to do. We have to create Twins, and then we have to put Sally and Sue into Twins. So I'll show you how to do that. You're going to say group add Twins. Okay. Now we have to add them, and by them I mean Sally and Sue, into Twins. And how you're going to do that is up to you, because in the Users and Groups Practice Lab, where all this can be found, there are 2 commands that you can use. And which one you use is really up to you. I'll show you the one that I prefer, because it's almost like the foolproof way of doing it. It's basically gpassword space -a for add, and then you're going to put in the username, so let's say Sally, and then the group name Twins. And we see adding user Sally to group Twins. Okay. The reason why I like this one is it seems like you're just basically speaking it. So we're saying gpassword @ Sally to Twins. Okay. So I'm going to do it again, but this time for Sue. And there we go. So now we've completed this step. Now you might be like, well, what was the other command, and why wouldn't you use it? So I'll show you, but I'm not going to actually use it. Basically, the other command should look like this: usermod -a capital G, then the group name, so Twins, and then the user, so like Sally. The reason why I don't like this one is that if you have a capital A and capital G, or a capital A and a small g, or a small a and a small g, if you do not do the right combination of the small a and the capital G, that can change how this works. And it's also odd to me to put the group first and then the user. It just doesn't feel as natural. So you can do it if you want, and it works the exact same way. So do whatever you're comfortable with. But for me, I just find that as long as you remember gpassword, everything else just feels natural. -a to add, username, group. It just seems easy to me, so that's what I do. Alright, so let's move on. Let's go to the next section. So it says add a disk. So now you're going to want to look at the practice lab for file systems and disks to complete all this. The first thing it says is add a 3 GB disk to SO1. We actually have to get out of SO1. We have to shut it down to add the disk in VirtualBox. So what you're going to do is you're going to say shutdown -h now and hit enter, and it'll shut down the virtual machine. Okay, perfect. So now wrong thing. Now what I'm going to do is go into VirtualBox. I'm going to click on SO1 and go to settings. And we're going to go to storage. We're going to click on controller SATA right here. And then you're going to click on the icon to the very right of it. It says adds hard disk. It's basically a little hard disk image with a plus on it. Click on that. Click on the first option, which is create new disk. Create new disk. VDI is perfect, so click next. Dynamically allocated is perfect, so click next. Give it whatever name you want. It doesn't matter. They're not going to test the name outside of VirtualBox or outside of your virtual machine. When they run the script, it's only going to test the name in the virtual machine. So you can call this whatever you want. You can put down Simon's Virtual Disk 1. Just make sure that it's not 8 gigabytes, because in this case we want 3 gigabytes. So change 8 to 3 and click create. And you can see it takes no time at all. Click OK when you're ready and start the machine back up. Okay, so while it loads, what I'm going to do is give you a hint. In the practice lab for file systems and disks, what you have to do is look at the section that talks about LVMs, because there's several sections, and one of them is classic partitioning, and one of them specifically talks about LVMs. And in this case, because we're going to be basically creating a new LVM, just look at that section. The rest of it doesn't matter. That whole section about LVMs is the only thing that we really care about. Now, this is one that you'll probably want to follow to a T. And even though I don't have eLearn available, I even wrote down some of the steps for myself because they're not easy to remember. But I'll do my best to show you what they are. I'll do my best to explain them. But this is just one where you're just basically going to follow the steps almost like to a T. The only difference is you're going to change the name. Like one of them says VG Share. Instead of VG Share, we're going to be calling it VG01. And then you're going to see something down the road where in the practice lab, or in the practice lab, it'll say something like Dev VG Share Catering. But in this case, we're going to be calling it Dev VG01 LVol0. So I'll show you everything, don't get confused, but I'm just letting you know, all you have to do is go into that practice lab when eLearn is available and look at the part where it specifically says something about LVM volumes. Okay? So now that SO1 is loaded, let's log into root. Type in the password, admin pass. And the first thing that I would do, even though you probably don't need to do it, is I would just make sure that the disk was added properly and that we can use it the way we want to use it. Okay, so let's do that. Let's type in ll/dev/sd star or asterisk, and once you type that in, you can hit enter. Now you're going to see a lot of information and you might not understand what this means, but basically this is what you need to know. James Long was a professor that created these OVA files. So he created these virtual machines. So when he created this virtual machine, he obviously gave it some storage. So he gave it the first storage that this virtual machine ever had. So this was basically considered SDA. And as you can see, we have a 1 and 2. And what these numbers mean is that they've already been partitioned and they're being used. Okay? But we have this guy down here, SDB, and it's not partitioned. That is our partition, or that is our virtual disk. That's the one that we created. So when it comes down to what you're looking at, you're basically looking at the one that the teacher initially created and it's already been partitioned. So you're going to see SDA12 for sure. And then you'll have SDB. Now on your test, you might have to do a couple disks. So you might see SDB and SDC. So it just goes in that order. Instead of 1, 2, 3, think of it ABC. Okay? But that's what we're looking at. So SDB is here, meaning that it's good. We can use this. So what we're going to do, I'm going to clear this and I'm going to show this to you. Hopefully this will help, but again, you just have to follow what's in the actual practice lab for file systems and disks under the LVM part. Okay, what we're going to do is say fdisk/dev/SDB, because it's the one that we added that we have to basically partition. Okay, we're going to hit enter. It's going to give us a lot of text. You don't have to read it. All you have to know is the command that we need to first use is N for new. And then we need to select either E or P. And because we want to partition it, we're going to select P and hit enter. This is going to ask us for a partition number. Now, nowhere here does it tell us that we're going to be having multiple partitions. So we're just going to stick with one, and that's all you need to do. Now you get something that says first cylinder. Okay, now first cylinder is probably best explained like this. You have a virtual disk and you have all these cylinders, and what it's asking you is how much of this disk do you want to use. So the first cylinder is the starting point of where you want to use all this storage. So obviously if we want the full thing, we want the starting point to be the very first cylinder. So it says default is 1, and that's exactly what we want. We want 1. So we'll hit 1 and hit enter. Then it says the last cylinder, which basically means what's the last point of the storage that you want to use. So again, we want the whole thing. So we can see that the whole thing is between 1 and 391. So obviously the last point should be 391 for us to have the whole thing. But on your test, just remember, you might get maybe 2 partitions, and maybe the first partition is going to be between starting point 1 and last cylinder 100. Okay, and then the second partition will be 101 to 391. So just be careful of that, but if it's very simple like it is here, all you need to know is the first cylinder is the very starting point of the storage, which is 1, and the last cylinder is the very last number, which is the last part. That's your last point where you're going to take everything. So we're going to type in 391 and hit enter. Okay, so now it's going to say Command M for help, which looks like what we had up here, right? And what you're going to be typing in is T, and T means type. I'm going to specify what type of partition this is, and we're going to hit enter. And it's up to you what you do. You can type L to list the codes. It'll look like this. I'll show you. So there's a bunch of codes and they tell you what it is, but we want an LVM volume group, and in the practice lab it tells you what the code should be. It says 8E, and if you're wondering why we're typing in 8E, if you look here, you'll see 8E here. It says Linux LVM. So this is what we want. So that's what you're going to type. Where it says hex code, make sure you type in 8E. Oh, not here, sorry, in the virtual machine. So 8E, hit enter, and there you go. Now the only thing left to do is write it. So you're going to confirm everything by typing W to write, and you're done. Okay, so we've now partitioned this as an LVM, but there's still a lot that we have to do. Okay, and we have to basically create this guy. All right, we need to create a new group name called VGO1. So the first thing we're going to do, I'll clear this information, and the first thing we're going to do is say PV create, and then our new partition. Actually, let's look at the partition first. LL/dev/SD star, or asterisk. Look at this now. Remember, we just had SDB, but now we have SDB1 because we've partitioned it. So what we're going to do, let me clear it again. We're going to be putting this in. It's PV create /dev/SDB1. Okay? And you're going to hit enter. Successfully created. So that's perfect. So now what we have to do is we have to create this group. So we're going to do something called VG create, and we are going to type in the name that we want, VGO1, VG, and then from where we want to create it from. We want to create it from dev SDB1. All right. Now I'm just going to confirm right here. We're going to say VG create, the name we want, and then from where we're going to be using it. So SD, in our case B, and then the number, which is 1. Okay, so we're going to hit enter, and that looks good. So now that we've created this group, now what we have to do is we basically have to create this 2 GB logical volume named dev VGO1 LVOL0. Okay, so if we go here, we can see that all you have to do is almost the same. LV create -big L, and then we're going to put a number of gigs that we want. So in this case, we want 2 gigs. So what the -big L means is basically label I'm going to say label. I don't think label is the actual correct term, but basically you can say in what we would recognize as like 2 gigs, you can just say 2G, and that will recognize it as 2 gigs. Then you're going to say -n, and you're going to give it basically the LVOL0 name, and then the name is the VGO1. Okay, so I'll show you what that actually looks like. So we're going to say LV create -L. It's got to be capital L. That's very important. We're going to say 2 gigs because that's what we want. We don't put the B. We just put 2G. Okay. Then -n because we're going to give it a name, and the name is going to be LVOL0. And then the actual name that we called it here, VGO1. Okay. So I'm just going to confirm that that looks right. LV create. Everything looks good. Hit enter. And there we go. We created it. So we've now done this part. We've created this, but now we have to build a file extension, or a file system basically on there. All right. And once again, I'm just going to look at here the way that I would look at the practice lab for the file systems and disks, and it'll tell me exactly what I need, which is make file system, or MKFS, -t, you put in the extension that we need. So in this case we need 4, so extension 4, and then you're going to put in the full name, which is dev, and then it's going to be VGO1 lvol0. Okay, so we'll do that right now. Make file system t extension 4, and then we are going to say dev VGO1 lvol0, and I'll hit enter. It does a bunch of things, but basically I don't see any errors, so that's probably a good thing. Okay, so what's the next thing we have to do? We have to mount it. So it says mount the new file system at twins. This mount must occur automatically when SO1 is rebooted. So there's a couple of things we have to do. So first of all, we need a folder named twins. So let's just make that. So I'm going to clear this. We're going to say make directory -p twins. Great. Now it says that we have to mount the new file system at twins, and it has to occur automatically when SO1 is booted. So let's do this. We're going to edit something in VI, which is your editor, and it's this file /etc/fstab, or I call it fstab, but I think it's actually fstab as file system tab. And we're going to hit enter, and we're going to see all these things, and we have to basically make a new line at the bottom. So hit I to insert, go all the way down, and what we're going to do is hit enter, and we're going to say dev VGO1 lvol0, because that's what we called it, right? And we want to mount it on twins. And here we're going to say extension 4, because that's the file system we used. Here we're going to say defaults, and here we're going to say 02. Now, number one is you don't have to make sure that it lines up, because sometimes things won't. So if things look like this, that's okay. It doesn't have to perfectly line up, but I like to line it up because it just looks nice. All you need to know is this guy right here is the lvol name, so we're going to reference this lvol. This right here is the mounting point, so the folder where we're going to mount this virtual disk so that we can actually use it. This right here is the file system type for this, so the system basically knows how to basically create files, delete files, and all that stuff. Defaults is just basically like how is it going to load. So when you reboot, defaults means it's just going to auto load. And then the 02, don't worry about that, just put a 02. Basically it's like a check. It checks, there's a Linux dump thing that it checks, and something else. But you don't have to memorize that. All you have to do is just memorize that 02, and in the practice lab for file systems and disk, it tells you to do this anyway. So just put it in. All you need to know is that this could change on your test, and this could change, and this could change. It could be extension 3, it could be something else, but most likely it'll be either extension 3 or 4. The folder could be whatever they ask, and the name VGO1 and lvol0 could be different, but you'll see. Hopefully that makes sense. When you're ready, hit escape, hit colon, WQ to write, hit enter, and then we can mount it. So let's clear this. And there's a couple ways you can mount it. You can mount it by just saying dev VGO1 and then lvol0. You can mount it saying mount twins, or you could say mount -a, because that means mount everything in the fstab file or fstab, and that's what I'm going to do. So what I'll do is just show you really quickly. If I say df, I see everything that is mounted, and I can see that my partition isn't mounted yet. So now if I type in mount -a, and then I type in df and hit enter, we can see twins is now mounted. So that is really, really good. But we're not done yet. Right here it says Sue and Sally must have full access to twins. Other regular users must have no access. So what does that sound like? It sounds like permissions. So what we have to do is we have to give it permission. So we've already created the folder, but what we want to do is basically say, let's make twins owned by the twins group, because Sue and Sally are in twins, no one else is in twins. So this is really important. People always forget it. What you want to do is type in chown. Okay, we'll say root : twins, because twins is the group, and we want twins to be the group that owns the twins folder. And then you're going to type in twins. And this is the actual folder we're referring to. So chown, we're going to say root with the twins group owning it. And then we're going to say they're going to own the twins folder. And we're going to hit enter. Alright, so now it says Sue and Sally must have full access to twins. Other regular users must have no access. So now what we can do is chmod to change permissions. Say 770, meaning the group members and the owner of the actual folder can do whatever they want, but everyone else can't. And we will say twins, /twins. Hit enter, and we are finally done. So we are done this part. So this is probably the thing that's going to take you the most time. But this is it. That's how you do it. And again, if you looked, I had to reference this all the time. So don't be afraid to go in eLearn. Don't have this pride thing. Just look at eLearn. Just know where to find it, and you'll get the answers that you need. Okay, so now we're moving on part D. Install MySQL. So it says Sally and Sue are database users, and they need the MySQL database installed and running. Install the MySQL database server. We've never done this in a practice lab or a graded lab before, so I have no idea what the name is of the service that we're going to be using to install, but it tells us, hint, MySQL-server. So what we're going to do is, I like to use yum install because it's the easiest way to install something, but it's not going to work if I put this in because SO1 does not have an internet connection. So remember, if it doesn't have an internet connection, it needs to find the file somewhere. And the only way that we can make it work is if we reference the DVD ISO image that I told you about, which is right here. So we need to make sure that VirtualBox has access to it first, and then we need to mount it. So let's click on Devices, click on Optical Drives, and it should be here, but if it's not, click Choose Disk Image, and then find it. And once you find it, just open it. If you want, click on Devices, Optical Drives, and see that it's here again. But once you've done that, you can do this. You're going to say mount dev/CD-ROM. So /dev/CD-ROM, enter. And if I hit DF and hit enter, I can see now the CentOS DVD is here, so the image is here. So I can now install the MySQL server. So I'm going to do that. So let's clear. And how you're going to do that, you're going to learn this in the practice lab for installing and upgrading software lab. You're going to say yum install, and we're going to say MySQL-server, and I'm going to hit enter. Then we can say yes, and it's going to install. And that's it. So just make sure, a lot of students forget this, make sure you mount that DVD ISO. Otherwise, this is not going to work. Definitely make sure you have this checked off, mounted, then say yum install and the service name, and you'll be good. So here's the next part. It says configure the MySQL database server to start automatically at boot. It says hint MySQL D. So to show you what that looks like, basically right now we have a list of things that are installed on the system. So we can say check config-list. There's 2 dashes, by the way, to list. And here we go. We have all of these services, and they're in alphabetical order. So let's look for MySQL server. Okay. If we go down this list, we won't find it, but we will find MySQL D. So even though we installed everything with this name, it actually installed it under MySQL D. So that is what we need to make sure that we change. And right now it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are off. What we want to make sure is, so that it starts automatically at boot, 0 and 1 should be off. Okay? 2, 3, 4, and 5 should be on, and then 6 should be off. So this is how we do that. Right now they're all off. We're going to say check config, the service name, so MySQLD, on. Now we can do check config -- list again, just to make sure, and you can see MySQLD has 0 and 1 is off, 2, 3, 4, 5 is on, and 6 is off now. So that's exactly what we want. So we've just done this part. Now all we have to do is make sure that MySQL server is running. So you can start manually or reboot it. So it's up to you. You can reboot the machine, but right now it's not on. Okay? So what you can do to do it easier is just say service MySQLD and then start or restart, whichever one you want. I'll just say start, make it simple. We got an okay, and looks like it's all good. So we've finally done this part. So we have one last thing to do. And this one seems tricky. It says party, twins share everything. Remember that was up here. I said it's not really important right now. So it says Sue and Sally want to share as many of their files as possible, even the files in their home directories. Number 1, configure their home directories so that each has read access to each other's home directory without giving other regular users any access. So this is just a permissions thing. But it says configure their accounts so that by default every file they create has a group of twins. So that's a little bit different. Do you remember when we did permissions, we just did one for twins, we said just 770, right? Well, we have to do something different, and it says initial login group. Okay, that's your hint. So think about that for a second. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. We are going to basically change the home directory of each of these users so that the ownership is with the group twins. Okay, do you remember how we did that with twins? We changed twins so the ownership was under the group twins. We're going to do that for each of their home directories. So let's do that right now. We're going to say chown. Now in this case, what we're going to do is instead of root, we're going to say Sally twins, because Sally is going to be the actual owner, the person that owns her home folder or her home directory. And then we're going to allow twins to be the group that owns that home directory. And then all you're going to do is you're just going to say home Sally. And we're going to do the same thing for Sue. So once again, chown, we're going to say the person that owns this directory is still going to be Sue, but the group that's going to own it is now going to be twins. Okay? And we're going to hit enter. And we didn't get any problems with that. But now, these guys can access each other's home directories, which is nice, but we still have to change the permissions so that every time a file is created, the created file is going to have a group of twins. So what we have to do is this. We have to say chmod 2770 and then the home directory of each user. So Sally and Sue. And that's it. So what this 2 does is you're used to basically 3 numbers for your permissions. You're probably used to 777 or 770. And if you do that, what will happen is that Sue and Sally can basically go into each other's home directories. But what will happen is if Sally creates a file in her home directory, it'll say Sally, Sally. And if Sue creates something, it'll say Sue, Sue. What we wanted is for it to say Sally and the group saying twins every time a file is created. So what's going to happen is you're going to make sure that you put a 2 in front of your 770 or 777 or whatever it is. And what that will do is that's going to make sure that whenever a file is created, the group of the file says it's twins. Okay. Now let me just check something really quickly. Configure the home directory so that each has read access. Okay, so I'm going to change this. Instead of 277, we want to make sure that for Sally has full access, but Sue can only read. So the permissions are actually going to change. So scratch that. Scratch 2770. We need 2750. Okay? So let's do this again. So chmod 2750 home Sally, and then chmod 2750 home Sue. So the reason why I changed this is that 7 means Sally is going to have full access, but 5 means that Sue's going to be able to read and execute, but not write. And then in Sue's home directory, Sue's going to have full access with that 7, but the 5 means that Sally can only read and execute, but not write. And that 2 will mean every file that Sue creates is going to have a group ownership of twins, sorry. So I hope that made sense, but that's it. Look, I'm done. So as you can see, let's even say I had to, make a, let's just do this. Let's take a, I don't know if I'll have, I won't have access because eLearn's down still, right? Let me just see. But as you can see, it's 6:43, and I start at 6:08. So it didn't even take me 40 minutes, and that's including all the explanations I gave you. So it's actually very easy to go through this. And let's even say it takes an extra 5 minutes to log into eLearn, go into Dropbox, download the file, send the file over to SO1, run the script, and send it back. It won't take long, especially if you know what you're doing. Let's even just go through the process of doing it. I'm just going to create a file. So let's just say touch script.txt, even though it's not the right thing. You're going to say scp script to root of SO1 at 10.1.1.20, and we'll put in the temp folder. Okay. We're going to put the password of admin pass. We're going to go into SO1, go into the temp folder. We will run the script, okay, which is script.txt. Obviously, it's not a real script, so it's not going to run anything. So let's just wait, 10 seconds, because that's all it's going to take to actually do the output. 1, 2, actually, we'll say this: touch output.txt, and then we're going to say CSP output and root of W01, and we're going to say 10.1.1.10 into the temp directory, admin pass. And then if eLearn was working, you can see that if I go into temp ls, I have the output text right here. So basically all I'd have to do is go into eLearn, upload it onto the Dropbox, and I'd be done. That's the whole test, and it didn't take me long. It takes me, like I said, at most 45 minutes. In this case, even with all the explanations I gave you, the test only took me about 40 minutes, okay? And you're going to say, yeah, but you said there's like 1 or 2 things that aren't on the practice test. So just put it this way. Those things, if you're prepared for it, might take you another 5-10 minutes max. So expect that this test can easily be done under an hour. If you don't know what you're doing, it might take you longer, but I promise you, if you familiarize yourself with each practice lab and you know where to get the commands that you need to, that the test is asking you for, it doesn't take long. So this is how you do it. I hope that this is very, very useful. If you have any questions, please let me know. I also have every single lab. So lab tour, no, I don't have lab tour. Sorry, I have users and groups. I have the network identity and basic networking lab one. I have the file systems and disks. I have the installing and upgrading software. I have system startup and services, which is where you find out about this one down here, where we had to start everything automatically. You're going to learn that in the startup and services practice lab. And let me see if there's anything else. There's about 6 of them that you're going to go through. I have videos on YouTube explaining each of the grade labs, so if you need any help with that, you can go into YouTube. You can find my grade lab videos for each of those, except for lab tour, and that can help you as well. So again, thank you for bearing with me. I know that I coughed and did a bunch of things, but hopefully it wasn't too gross, and hopefully this helps you and you get an amazing mark on your test. Let me know how it goes, and I will see you next week. All right, later guys. Bye.